Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio, joined by United States Senator Thom Tillis of the great state of North Carolina. Good morning, Senator. Thanks for being up early to talk with us.
Good morning, Hugh.
You are on armed services, judiciary, on banking, and on veterans affairs. I got questions on all of them, but let me start with the awful news of the weekend in El Paso, in Dayton. Do you support the president's call for red flag laws? And Lindsey Graham, your colleague on judiciary, came up with an idea to find financial support for states that adopt stop orders or red flag laws like Doug Ducey has proposed in Arizona. What do you think of that?
I think it's a good start. Obviously, we've got to make sure that due process is assured for anyone who would go through that. But I think we have to start taking steps in that direction.
Now, you also are on judiciary, and I always ask about judges because judges matter so much. You've got 43 circuit court judges approved, 2 Supreme Court justices approved in this term, 99 district court judges approved. But there's a lot left to do, Senator Tillis. You guys, is there anyone going to get left behind if you get the nominees up to you?
No, I don't think so. I think we're doing a good job in the Judiciary Committee of fully vetting them and then working with our colleagues. Some of the district court judges, we are getting support from the Democrats. Many of them we have to more or less have a shirts and skins vote, but I feel confident that we'll move them through. And quite honestly, that's why we had to change the rules, because Chuck Schumer was taking unprecedented steps, completely running afoul of Senate traditions to hold us up and only have 1 or 2 votes a week. I think you see that we have several votes a week. We've got several stacked up when we get back in September.
Have you talked to the leader since he took his spill and broke his shoulder?
I haven't. I thought I'd give him a break. I was happy to see the post and the picture of him. He's in good spirits, and he'll be spending his recess rehabbing, but I'm sure he'll be right back and be the same good leader that he's been my entire time in the Senate.
Yeah, we really can't lose Cocaine Mitch for a couple of weeks. We need him back on the floor. Let me then turn.
He's the Grim Reaper now. He's going with the Grim Reaper. He's the Grim Reaper for all bad ideas coming out of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi.
A lot of those. Let's turn to armed services. You voted for the 2-year appropriation. I am very glad it ended sequestration. Sequestration is now dead, right?
Well, it is with this with the budget caps deal. It's at least averted, except for any sort of contention we get when we get into regular order appropriations. The budget deal was nothing more than setting boundaries on the appropriations bills that we'll take up in September. I would think that the Department of Defense will be first among them. I think we'll have consensus on that. Military construction and each of the lanes of appropriations we'll have to go through. And if we can't get agreement on every one of them, then there's potential that we have a CR that's far less than the whole of government.
Now, that would be a disaster, because I thought the advantage of 2 years is it would allow the Pentagon to start doing some of their major programming, planning, and acquisition programs. You are, for example, on the subcommittee on sea power. I'm a big proponent of the 355-ship Navy. We still don't have a plan on paper for that. Do you think this budget will allow the Navy to finally get going, or maybe the new CNO, and produce for you a plan to get to 355?
I believe it will. Without it, there was no chance. We were able to get 2 years of appropriations in the past. That was a game changer. What the American people need to understand is when we get into these CRs, these continuing resolutions, they can't plan ahead of the horizon of the continuing resolution. So if it's 90 days, that's no way to plan. China is planning in terms of decades, and we've been forcing the DOD to plan in terms of months. So this deal, getting 2-year appropriations, is a big deal. It makes the money more the money is more productively spent, and you can make long-term commitments.
Now, Senator Thom Tillis, that China is rolling off a capital ship, a military ship, every month. We're not doing anything like that. Have you sat down with the Secretary of the Navy, the Undersecretary of the Navy, the CNO, and said, where are we going to build, and what are we going to build, and why don't we know 2 years into the Trump administration?
Well, the CNO nominee that we passed out of committee last week, I asked him that question in Senate Armed Services as part of his nominations hearing, and I asked him specifically, does the longer-term funding give us a better chance and give us more certainty? He said yes. So we've got to get a specific plan in place for the 355-ship Navy. We also have to get a plan in place for the next generation Navy that may have the capacity of 355 ships or more, but we've got to look into countering what China is doing with smaller, more autonomous vessels. We've got to look at a Navy of the future at the same time we're building the Navy of the present, which is that 355-ship Navy.
Well, what did you make of Admiral Gilday? He's a vice admiral, a 3-star, jumping up to CNO. That's only happened twice in the history of the United States Navy, long and storied history. How did he impress you?
He impressed me. Impressed me with the fact that Lieutenant Gilday was in combat situation. He was on a vessel that was struck, and he understands what the everyday sailor is going through. I think having someone with his experience is going to be a real plus at CNO.
All right, now let's switch over. You mentioned China. The news this morning is that they have devalued their currency. We have not now designated them as a currency manipulator. And Mike Allen in the Axios AM is quoting an expert. Ian Bremmer is saying it's Cold War 2.0. What do you think?
I think that President Trump, is the first one that's taken China to task, and it's coming at a historically important time. If we don't find an opportunity and come to an agreement on fair trade, then we're going to be in trouble. The Chinese are they're not like our economy. They are teetering on recession. What you're seeing are reactions to a country that's worried about Trump's policies working. It's going to, anytime you get into a war, an economic trade war or a kinetic war, there are going to be some casualties. So I'm sure I'm going to be in North Carolina. I'm headed out, get on a flight in about 45 minutes out in eastern North Carolina. I know the farmers are going to be worried with the last step that China has taken, but we need to understand that this is not only a trade war, it's a war for our future. China wants to be the dominant military and economic power in a matter of about 25 years. We have got to head that off for the good of the world.
Now, we need to do that in concert with Australia, Japan, and South Korea, the Philippines, and, yes, Vietnam. Do you think we're on that path to orchestrating not a adversarial relationship with China, but one which links up in a military sense and in a diplomatic sense and in a financial sense with the nations in the region that are also feeling the push of China?
That's exactly what we have to do here. We need to get the USMCA passed so that we get the trade agreement here in North America settled. Then we need to quickly move with trade agreements with each of those countries, starting with Japan. But if we build strong economic ties to the Asia-Pac partners and allies, then that's another thing that China's going to have to look at, and then just become a good actor economically and militarily.
And if they do that, I think they'll grow fast. I'm a big believer that if they were to open their country to missionaries and to free market principles, that they would stabilize and they would just boom, the way Deng Xiaoping did. But I don't know about President Xi. What do you think he's up to?
Well, I think, he's got a lot of factors that he's got to work with. The growing middle class, and although they have a heavily censored internet, there's going to be more and more opportunities for the Chinese people to see what's possible with true freedom. Those pressures are coming from within. At the same time, if we get our alliances, we get our economic trade in the Pacific Rim, even better trade with Europe in place, then I think it's going to force China to become just a nation that wants to prosper itself, but not do it at the expense of other nations and our national security. So I think the president's making the right call. Look, this has been a bipartisan failure of past administrations to take China to task, and I'm glad that the president has the courage and the will to go about a strategy which is maximum pressure. We have to put pressure on them economically. We've got to fund our Department of Defense so we make it very clear that militarily we're going to maintain an advantage. We don't want to invade China, but we want to be able to protect ourselves and our allies. And this president's proving he's committed to doing that.
Now, Senator Thom Tillis, I want to ask you about a crossover. You're on the Senate Committee on Judiciary, the Subcommittee on Intellectual Property. You were also on the Senate Banking Committee, Subcommittee on Economic Portfolio and Financial Institutions. Facebook wants to start a currency, the Libra. I worry that it will become the reserve currency for the world and displace the dollar. What was your reaction to the Libra, the announcement by Facebook that they're getting into cryptocurrency?
I think the key is whether it's Facebook or Amazon or anyone else who decides that they want to get involved in the payments business, that we've got to create a regulatory construct that doesn't allow the Libra to become the global currency. And so we're watching it very closely. We're putting together a series of oversight hearings to figure out how do we regulate this new space. Hugh, the reality is if we don't have a U.S.-based company get into this game, then China or European nations, some other one will. So it's a matter of getting the regulatory construct right so that we can still have the certainty that we do with the current system, but recognizing in a digital economy, a lot of our transactions, a lot of our payments are going to be cyber transactions. We've just got to be able to regulate it, have transparency, and have consumer protections in place.
So you sound like fairly open to the Facebook initiative. They are talking about self-regulation. That is, appointing an oversight board for the company's social media practices. I would assume Libra as well. What do you think of that first step? Is that something on which the government might build? Is that something to which you're open?
Well, the problem with that is Facebook has a really atrocious record on self-regulation. Let's take a look at how elections have been manipulated. Let's take a look at how human trafficking and pedophiles are moving across Facebook platforms or these other cyber platforms. So I'm not quite so sure. This is such a young technology, a young area of corporate governance. I'm not so sure. Look, I'm not a heavy regulator, but what I think regulations do exist to protect the consumer and to protect our national and homeland security. So we're going to look at it very hard. Maybe if someone can come up, I don't think Facebook has the credibility to do it by themselves because of the lapses in the past. So we'll have to look at that. But we also have to look at their implementation plan. I asked a question in an oversight hearing. They said they were going to go live in 2020. I asked them basic questions that I would ask as somebody that's done large-scale implementations. They couldn't even tell me the timeline, the deliverables, and what they were going to have in place in 2020. So I think it's going to take longer for them, and that gives us the glide path that we need to make sure if we need additional regulations that we'll put them in place.
Last question, Senator Tillis. I want to let everyone know you're running for re-election. I just posted Thom Tillis, Thom Tillis.com. 2 L's in Tillis is where the website is. When it comes time to sit down with, when you talk to constituents, you're out there campaigning, does Facebook come up? I mean, does the social media giantness drive any voter concern?
Well, it's a very interesting. I think people have two very different views. They say, by gosh, you got to bring Facebook and all these other social media presences to heel, but then they say, but don't restrict my ability to use them. So we're trying to figure out how we thread the needle. But, Hugh, if you look at what's going on in society today, how quickly these social media platforms can amplify lies, can actually cause a lot of the problems we're seeing in society today. We've got to figure out how these companies that are look, these digital platforms have some of the world's richest people now, billionaires. Take a look at Bezos. Take a look at Zuckerberg. Maybe they ought to turn some of that profit that's gone into their bank accounts back into corporate governance and corporate responsibility. Those are the things that we're looking at in the Senate.
Senator Thom Tillis, good luck in your flight down to North Carolina today in the campaign. Again, friends, it's ThomTillis.com, ThomTillis.com. He's got to win re-election. Thank you, Senator. I got to remind you of ReliefFactor.com.